Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. 6 weeks had passed since the meeting in the Hogshead, and life in the castle had, if possible, gotten worse. The Toad's tyranny had become fanatical and had evolved from that of an inconvenience to something of a complete hindrance. She had all but nullified any of the authority of the other professors, including the headmaster, and now the castle seemed to be functioning on her will and rules. To enforce her rules, she had offered certain students a place in her inquisitorial squad, which was nothing short of a group of bullies and sycophants, looking to victimize any they came across without due reasoning. Of course, being handpicked by Umbridge herself, the squad consisted of mostly older Slytherin students from pureblood families and a select few who were seen as lackeys. At first there had been much vocal objection to such a group, but those individuals were soon silenced after a detention or two with the Toad herself. Yes, Dolores Umbridge was very happy with her implementation and the enforcement of her decrees, and she found that being on top here could be quite the easy assignment. There were, of course, a few students that still needed to be quelled, as demonstrated by the occasional disturbance in the castle in the form of fireworks and other pranks, usually aimed at her squad, but Umbridge was certain the perpetrators would be apprehended soon enough, and then her peace would prosper. Break. The group that had met in Hogsmeade had thus far been successful in holding their meetings undisturbed. Simple proximity and silencing wards, coupled with Fred and George placing time-delayed fireworks throughout the castle on the evenings they met, had so far assured them a window of opportunity for practice. They made a point of changing the location each time, and thanks to Hermione's ingenuity with some charmed galleons, the time and date could be given to all discreetly. They had so far worked on some of the spells required to complete their eau de Baloil in defense, and a few extracurricular ones for all-round self-defense. Hermione would research the spells before the meetings, and the group would work on casting them together after she explained the theory. The older students in attendance would help the younger ones with the eau de Baloil level work, and then the group would work collectively on the other magic they wanted to practice. Tonight was the 4th meeting the group had scheduled, and they were currently gathered in an unused classroom on the 6th floor waiting for the meeting to begin. Hermione had been tirelessly researching spells that would help in a fight, but focused more on spells that would allow them to escape. It seemed that the library at Hogwarts was quite a good source for extra spells, particularly on basic dueling magic. So far the group had worked on stunning, disarming and binding spells, and today she was hoping to teach them the impediment jinx that Harry had discovered last year and had used during the tournament. Hermione found her position rather odd. She had never been the center of attention or even really listened to until she met Ron and Harry, but things had really changed with start of these meetings. People listened to her and even sought further advice from her, which she happily provided, where she could. Despite this, however, she was not entirely comfortable leading this group, and mostly felt out of sorts being in this position. She knew Harry would complete the teaching part of the group better than she ever could, and he wouldn't make mistakes when casting spells, as she did occasionally. But she knew that there really was no other who could take the reins in the circumstances, so she persevered and did what she could. Having worked through the entirety of the eau de Baloil level magic in defense, she watched as the rest of the group practiced and waited her turn to demonstrate the spell. After a few more minutes, the group seemed content with the academic portion of the meeting, so she stepped forward to address them when she saw they were waiting for her to begin. "Okay, I think today we will work on the impediment jinx," she announced. "What does it do?" Neville asked, clearly never having heard of it before. "It slows down your opponent and buys you a little time to either escape or attack with something that takes a little longer to produce," Hermione explained, "but it does have its drawbacks and isn't completely reliable," she added. "What do you mean?" Lee Jordan inquired. "Well, if you cast it against a powerful wizard or creature, it may have little to no effect," she began in her usual lecture mode. "The duration of the spell depends on how powerful you cast it and the power of your opponent. So casting it on someone like Dumbledore or you-know-who probably isn't a good idea, but it is useful to know," she finished. "Okay, that sounds good," Hannah Abbott said. What would you follow up with, though, if you're not as strong as your opponent? She questioned. Hermione considered the question for a moment before she answered, Well, if you were looking to escape, then a banishing charm would be good to give you more space, she suggested thoughtfully. They are usually easy to block, but quick to cast, so if you cast it straight after, then there's a good chance it will hit, if your first jinx lands, she concluded, nodding at her own logic. What's the incantation and wand movement? Astoria Greengrass asked, keen to begin practicing. The wand movement is a semicircle from left to right, followed by a flick towards the opponent, and the incantation is Impedimenta. She explained. With that, the group moved off in pairs to begin. Hermione, as usual, worked with Ron, as most others were reluctant. He was still very irritated by the presence of the Slytherins, and was convinced they would get them caught, something he was still very vocal about. Most of the group ignored his outbursts as they had become the norm, and no matter how often Fred and George would tell him to shut up, he wouldn't listen. Hermione had hoped that with a war brewing and Harry no longer here to overshadow him, that Ron would actually commit himself to schoolwork and his own development. If anything, however, he had become even more lazy, and his work was worse than it had ever been. He continually made excuses to not complete his homework, and Hermione knew had it not been for her helping him, he would be failing miserably. At best, he was still only just achieving a passing grade in all subjects, and she knew he was going to perform poorly in his OWS with or without the Toad being here. She was sure he was sore about not receiving the prefect position, which for some reason he felt he was a shoo-in for with the absence of their wayward friend. He was continuously surly. Even in the meetings he made little effort with the spell work, and would clearly rather be reading his Quidditch magazines or playing chess. No matter how much Hermione tried to help him, it made no difference to his attitude. He was rebelling in the face of what he felt was unfair treatment to himself by the fact he had not been given the prefect position. Secretly, Hermione thought that he didn't deserve it. He was simply too lazy and immature to be a good role model to the younger years in their house. She stood opposite him and gestured for him to try the spell. When he did, nothing happened, and he was immediately angry. She could see that his wand movement was only done half-heartedly, so she pointed it out to him. You have to mean it, Ron, she explained. It is an intent-based spell and won't work unless you want it to, and your wand movement wasn't fluid enough, she pointed out. The boy remained red-faced in his anger and growled before trying it again. Impedimenta, he intoned through gritted teeth, which resulted in nothingness once again. Impedimenta, he shouted in frustration, causing a yellow smoke to leak from his wand instead of a jet of light, the same color. Getting angry won't help. Hermione tried to explain, but the redhead was already shaking in rage and turning a deeper shade of crimson. It's a stupid spell anyway. Ron spat as he walked away and sat at the edge of the room and pulled a magazine from within his robes. Just ignore him, Hermione, Fred said from behind her, shaking his head. He's just being a miserable git because of the Slytherins being here, he added. Hermione looked at her friend and simply shook her head at him. There was only so much she could do to help him, and if he was unwilling to try, then her efforts would be fruitless. She began scanning the room to check the progress of the rest of the group. She could see they were all doing quite well with the spell, and were all working well together in their pairs. It was then that she checked her watch and saw that it was time to end the meeting. That's all we have time for today, guys. She called to the room. Good work, everybody, she finished appraisingly. Granger Daphne Greengrass called to gain her attention as everyone was preparing to leave. Yes, Daphne? Hermione sighed at being addressed by her last name. Didn't you know who used lots of creatures like werewolves and giants last time? She asked. Shouldn't we be working on fighting them? She questioned further, causing many in the room to nod at her observation. Well, werewolves are very fast and very powerful and notoriously difficult to beat, she said, her expression darkening. I saw Professor Lupin transform in third year, so I would recommend that you run and get away as quickly as you can. They are very feral in wolf form, and not so intelligent, and it is easier to escape from them than try to fight them, she continued. A simple scent masking charm and silencing charms on your feet will help when you get out of sight of one. If you do have to fight, then you need to have a silver blade handy or be able to conjure weapons to banish at them. You don't want to get close at all," she explained firmly, remembering the advice she had gotten from her third-year book. "We don't start conjuration until 7th year," Neville interjected. "Yeah, and it is very tiring," George added knowingly. "We should practice the disillusionment charm then," Angelina Johnson broke in. Seeing the blank expressions on most of the faces in the room, she elaborated, "It makes you near invisible, that with the scent masking charm and silencing charms should be enough." She shrugged. "That's a good idea," Hermione praised, annoyed with herself that she hadn't thought of it. "What about giants?" Michael Corner asked, looking apprehensive at the thought. "They're pretty much immune to magic," Hermione explained. "You have to be more than exceptionally powerful and accurate to bring one down. You have to use solid objects, and they need to be heavy and deadly enough to stop one. The amount of magic you would need used to do it would be exhausting," she concluded, shaking her head. "But it can be done?" Katie Bell asked curiously. "Yes, but very few can do it, and most die trying. The last person to kill a giant single-handed was someone Potter in the 1940s, when they fought for Grindelwald," she said, frowning at the effort to remember the information she had read so long ago. "Potter?" Fred asked. "A relative of our little Harrykins?" "I think so," she answered uncertainly. "I tried to research his family, but have found nothing," she admitted sheepishly. "And you won't," Daphne interrupted. "The Potters are known for their privacy and secrecy. They always have been, and with the death of Potter's parents, everything became more obscure. I think Dumbledore had some laws passed to protect his family secrets until he comes of age and can do it himself," she finished. "What do you mean?" Hermione asked. "Well, when a prominent family is expecting a child, they announce it to the public," Daphne explained, gaining murmurs of agreements from those who were aware. "Well, the Potters never have," she added. "A Potter child just seem to materialize when they come of school age. They always have done, and the child's parentage isn't always clear. The Potter family used to be huge, but many died fighting wars, and the family eventually dwindled down to what remained when you-know-who came along. I very much doubt any of us would have been aware of Potter until he came to school if that Halloween night didn't happen," she concluded confidently. "Surely there would be a public record," Hermione stated, feeling a little shocked at this new information about her friend's family. "Sealed and can only be accessed by a Potter. Blood magic, I imagine," Daphne explained. "But that's dark magic?" Hermione exclaimed, shocked further. "How do you know this?" she asked, with a frown marring her face. "My mum works in the Department of Familial Records, and she told me," Daphne explained. "Well, from what I know, the Potters aren't exactly a light family," Neville interjected, looking embarrassed. "Of course they are," Ron broke in angrily. "You know who went after them," he added, with a sharp nod. "I didn't mean they were dark," Neville replied quietly. "What did you mean, Neville?" Hermione asked, biting her lip worriedly. Neville sighed, feeling unsure on how to answer the question without revealing too much of his own life, particularly the fate of his parents. "My parents and Harry's parents were really close friends," he began. "I didn't know until a couple of years ago when I asked my gran who all the people were in the photos I have of them," he added, knowing Hermione was going to question him as to why he had never told Harry. "What has that got to do with anything?" Tracy Davis questioned impatiently. Neville just sighed again before he replied. "Well, I asked my gran about Harry's family, knowing that his parents were dead. I wondered where he was raised because I found out my mum was his godmother and his mum was mine," he finished sadly. It was clear that the entirety of the room was quite shocked by that statement. It was Hermione that composed herself and managed to question him first. "Why did you never tell Harry?" she asked softly. Neville shrugged. "It was pointless," he said dejectedly. "Me and Harry aren't close friends, and it wouldn't make any difference. Neither of our parents could fulfill the duty anyway," he explained quietly. Ginny was about to ask a question, but was cut off by an even more irritable Tracy Davis. "And how does that not make the Potters light?" she asked, clearly frustrated. Neville shook himself from his reverie before he answered. "Oh, Well, I asked my gran about the rest of his family, and she told me about his grandfather. I think she said his name was Charles, and he was a baron. She said she went to school with him," he finished. "That's it!" Hermione exclaimed. "He was the last one to kill a giant," she explained triumphantly. "A baron?" Lee Jordan asked. "I've heard of lords, but not a baron," he added, looking confused. "Barons are really rare," Daphne cut in. "You have to earn the title in battle and be a very good fighter. It means you become a protector of the land and people," she explained to those who were unaware. "Is it that rare?" Hermione asked, not having come across the title in regards to the wizarding world. "Yes, you get 1 or 2 every few centuries at the most. There was 2 from the last war, so one of them must have been Potter's grandfather," Daphne explained. "None of this still explains why they're not light," a now irate Tracy Davis interrupted. It was Neville that finally answered, after a moment of remembering what his gran had told him. "My gran told me she saw him duel a guy once, and he burnt him to a crisp before he castrated him. She said he used dark magic in the fight," he said, frowning. "She said he was very powerful and ruthless, and even Dumbledore wouldn't have wanted to fight him," he finished. "But he fought against Grindelwald," George pointed out. "Yes, and to survive that he would have had to kill," Hermione said in just above a whisper. "Are you sure that's what she said?" she asked Neville. "Yes," he answered vehemently. "That's why I said I don't think the Potters are a light family. They fight in wars and always have meaning. They use spells and magic that is lethal," he concluded with a shrug. "But they fight against dark wizards," Fred stated, looking confused. "Yes, but that doesn't mean they are light, just because they fight for the light side," Hermione replied. "There has to be some willing on the light side to kill for the light side to win," she pointed out. "Look at Mad-Eye Moody," she added, using the ex-Auror as an example. "He openly admits to using dark magic," Fred pointed out. "But he fights for the light side," he added. "So Harry's family are like Moody?" Ron asked disbelievingly. "They must be," Hermione replied. "Did your gran mention anything about his gran?" she asked Neville, who shook his head. "All she said was that she was a healer and died not long after Harry was born," he answered. "My mum said the same," Daphne added. "Can't you just go to where they are buried and see?" Tracy asked. "No," Daphne answered. "The graves were charmed to stop you-know-whose followers from desecrating them. Only Potter and people he'd take with him can see them," she explained knowingly. "They really do like to keep their secrets, don't they?" Tracy mock-sulked. The group laughed at her antics before Hermione reminded them that they should be leaving. They were again halted by a question, this time by Katie Bell. "What about the Dementors?" she asked nervously. "They sided with him last time." Hermione saw the nervous expressions of the people gathered and knew they were not going to be pleased with her answer, but she would not lie to them. She let out a deep breath before she replied. "Obviously the Patronus charm is the best way to deal with them, but I can't do it," she explained, clearly disappointed in herself. "I'm not powerful enough, and I don't think I ever will be," she continued sadly. "You're only 16, Angelina Johnson pointed out. "Yes, but less than 1% of the entire population of wizards and witches are capable of producing one. You need a hell of a lot of power and concentration and be able to maintain both at the same time to do it," she explained further. "I have the concentration but not the power, and the chances of even one of us in here being able to do it is almost impossible," she concluded. "How long have you been trying?" Ginny asked. "Since the end of 3rd year," Hermione answered dejectedly. "I can feel the pull on my magic, but nothing happens, and it drains me completely. I feel very weak afterwards, and can't even light my wand for a few hours," she explained. "That should tell you how powerful Harry is, knowing he could produce and maintain a corporeal one at just 13, she concluded. The members of the group looked at each other, feeling defeated. They knew that Granger was easily one of the most powerful in the room, and if it had that effect on her, then none of them had a realistic chance at doing any better. There was only one person in the room who begged to differ and promised themselves they would master it. They remembered the affect the Dementors had when they boarded the train in search of Sirius Black, and they were not willing to experience that again without the ability to fight back. With that, the somewhat somber teens exited the room and made their way back to their common rooms in silence, each lost in thoughts of what was coming and what they would do. Many of them hoped that what they had heard about the Potter family was true and that Harry would come through for them if he was in fact alive. Most of them knew they were not born fighters, nor destined for greatness on the battlefield, but they would learn as much as they could to defend themselves when and if the situation called for it. Inside, they knew they would need a savior, someone who was willing to end the fight, and someone who would do what was necessary for that to happen. Break. Narcissa Malfoy was stressed and had been since she had left that meeting at Gringotts. When she reflected back on said meeting, she would get shiver travel down her spine and through her very core at the memory. Learning that her grandfather was alive had of course shocked her, but that shock was nothing compared to seeing that Potter was alive and what he had become. She hated to admit it to herself, but she was terrified of the teen in the same way she feared the Dark Lord. There was just something highly unusual about the pair of them that made her uncomfortable. Lucius had barely paid any attention to, as he had been continuously busy on behalf of his master, attempting to manipulate things in his favor, so he had not become aware of her tense and nervous disposition. She knew he was spending much time abroad, attempting to gain allies for the cause, so he had barely been present to notice much anyway. She had tried to find a way around the vow she had given, but even the thought of breaking it caused her magic to react very painfully, and thus she found herself in quite the quandary. Her husband continued to strut around like a prized peacock, completely ignorant of the developments that she was aware of. He was a capable wizard himself, but she knew just from what she saw that he was no match for the Potter boy. She had written to Draco, as Potter had suggested, and begged him to keep his head down and not get involved in the coming conflict, but had received no reply and assumed that he had already made up his mind. Her stress levels had reached a point where it was quickly becoming unbearable. She knew if Lucius became aware that she had withheld important information like this, regardless of the vow she had given, he would be very displeased and her life would become very miserable, if he allowed her to live, that is. She had discreetly begun moving funds into a private account if the need to flee arose. This was, of course, a last resort. She loved her son and husband, but her self-preservation had caused her to take steps to ensure her safety. She knew that either way the war was going to be a painful experience for her. She was either going to lose what was left of her blood relatives, or she was going to lose the family she had married and created. She resigned herself to the fact that the coming days were going to be dark for her regardless of the outcome of the brewing war. Break. The headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry had barely been seen since he learned of the death of his longtime friend. Dumbledore felt as though a part of him had died along with Rubeus. He had known the man since he was a child and had grown to love him as any man would their own son. Not being that way inclined towards the opposite sex, he had never fathered children of his own, but he had found the closest thing possible in Rubeus. He carried a lot of guilt where the half-giant was concerned. Not only had he failed to have him reinstated as a student after he had been expelled as a boy, he had been killed while carrying out a task for him, and that had pushed him to a grief he hadn't felt since the death of his younger sister. Yes, Dumbledore was miserable, and his thoughts of guilt and misery had led him to reflect on other aspects of his life. His sister had died in an accident involving himself, his brother and Gellert, and Dumbledore felt her blood on his hands every passing day. This was the first incident he would never be able to forgive himself for, and knew his brother never would either. He could only hope that wherever his sister was, that she did forgive him for his mistake. The second instant that came to mind was the death of Gellert during their duel that concluded the Second War. He had only intended to subdue him and bring him in, but it was not to be. Had he been able to travel with him as planned, Albus knew that his friend would not have become what he did, as he was always able to rein in his more darker and violent tendencies. Without Albus's guidance, he had succumbed to the darkness and become the monster he did, and again Dumbledore felt the blood on his hands of all of those that fell to his maniacal cause. Then there was the most recent victim of his interferences, Harry Potter. The death of Rubeus had made Albus realize that he had the same paternal instincts towards the boy and loved him as though he were his grandson. But again, all he could see was the way he had failed the boy. He knew the Dursleys were not pleasant people, but never dreamed they could treat the boy the way they had. That was mistake number one, placing the boy with them. His school years had barely been any better, and each year he only made further mistakes in regards to Harry, who continuously surprised the older man with his resilience and abilities. When he discovered the Horcrux within the boy at the end of his third year, he retired to his office and wept at what he thought the boy's fate would have been. He vowed he would dedicate the rest of his life, if necessary, to find a way to save the boy, and he did just that. He had to go against his own morals and venture into some very dark and obscure magic to find the solution. But he found it. It was not ideal in any sense, but he knew it would have to be done. When he discovered that the abomination had been removed by other means, he once again retired to his office and wept for the boy, this time in joy. Reflecting back on all the mistakes he had made, he concluded that he did not deserve the forgiveness of either Harry or Rubeus, but he would do all he could to atone for his mistakes. He knew he would have to have a long and painful conversation with the young man in the future, and he would face the consequences when they came. He simply wanted to help Harry as much as he could while he could, and would do all he could to do so. He vowed that he would hold nothing back and be completely open and honest with him. If anyone deserved it, it was Harry Potter. In honor of his fallen friend, he had already personally erected a monument in the Forbidden Forest with the help of many of the creatures who lived there. They all knew, respected, and even loved the man who had cared for them when they had needed it. The acromantula, Aragog, had been inconsolable at the loss of his friend, and vowed that his kind would never side with Riddle and would protect the forest from him and his ilk. Even the centaurs had paid their respects with their own warrior salute, that they only gave to their own kind after they had fallen in battle. Dumbledore had been particularly touched by this sentiment, knowing that it was very unusual for this honor to be bestowed on a different creature. The creatures of the forest, upon learning of the death, came from far and wide to add their own touch to the monument. What stood now was a life-sized wooden Norwegian ridgeback, adorned with many gifts from various creatures. There was a unicorn horn, a bow and arrow from the centaurs, an abundance of very rare and valuable acromantula silk given by Aragog himself, various types of fangs, antlers, and feathers, the straw hair, and even what Dumbledore suspected was Nundu fern and a chimera claw. He really did not want to know where they had come from. Albus was certain that Rubeus would love the tribute and only wished he could do more. He knew it was not wise to announce the death publicly as yet, and knew that even if he did, there would be little compassion from the public, thanks to the article that Skeeter had published the previous year in regards to his parentage. Despite his best efforts, the depression he felt remained, and he was certain it would not shift any time soon. He knew he would have to speak to Harry in the near future, but in the meantime, he would do all he could to make his final task at least possible. Break! Sirius Black was experiencing mixed emotions. He was happy that he had received a letter from Harry this morning requesting a meeting. It was a simple note that read, "Same place, same time." He was excited to see his godson again, but he was very worried about Remus. He had left 2 months ago to gauge the mood of the werewolf clans on the continent, and had heard no word from the man since his departure, which was very unusual, especially considering that he had written to him shortly after he returned from Gringotts. He knew there was little he could do, however, as he was stuck at his hated home. He knew Harry was trying to locate the traitor rat and only hoped he had good news on that front to give him that very night. He had continued his training in much better spirits and with more determination after witnessing firsthand the development of his godson. He now knew he was more than capable of handling himself in a fight, and was pleased with the progress. It was now seldom he wallowed in the guilt he felt in regards to his failing of many years past. Yes, the pain was still raw, but he had been given the chance to redeem himself, and he fully intended on doing so as soon as he was a free man, something he was confident would happen with Harry personally seeing to it. All he had to do now was while away the final hours before he would see Harry again and find out what progress, if any, the teen had made. Break. Harry Potter had experienced a very mixed 6 weeks. He had immediately begun his search for the rat and had even attained the help of Dobby. What became clear quickly was that the traitor was hiding, and hiding well. From Arcturus he had learnt that things were beginning to move behind the scenes. A few people of note had gone missing, and he had heard of attempts of extortion and intimidation taking place in several establishments. Of course, none of this had been reported in the Prophet, and Harry guessed that this was the work of the idiotic minister. He had spent time in disguise, frequenting Nocturne Alley and many other unsavory locations, until he at last had come across his first lead on Pettigrew, which he planned on following the next day. It had been 3 days ago that he found himself in a rundown pub in the aforementioned alley when he overheard a conversation at the table next to his where two people who were not familiar to him were talking in hushed voices. So he sent the rat to Toulouse to represent him. A very grubby and unkempt man asked his companion disbelievingly. "Shh, keep it down," his equally unclean acquaintance replied, shooting a furtive glance around the room. Harry pretended to mind his own business and feigned drinking from his filthy glass of fire whiskey, which he was gradually wondrously vanishing instead of consuming. "Yes," the man continued when he was sure they were not being eavesdropped on. "Don't ask me why, but he seems to trust him," he added, shaking his head. "I wouldn't trust that pissant to parley with flubberworms," the first man declared defiantly. "Then be grateful it isn't up to you," his friend retorted. Having gained what he came for, Harry placed a single galleon on the bar and nodded at the barman before exiting and making his way home. When he arrived and informed Arcturus of his development, the older man looked pleased with the progress. "Good work, Potter," he praised. "Now you can relax for a couple of days before you go. You have been a surly git since we got back from the family meeting," he proclaimed with a hint of annoyance in his voice. "I'm sorry," Harry intoned sincerely. "It's just that this is important to me," he finished. "I know, so why don't you go and see the idiot before you go and tell him," Arcturus suggested. "And don't forget what we talked about after the meeting," he added firmly. Harry could hardly forget the conversation the two had had when they returned from Gringotts. He had apparated into the drawing room and was making his way to his room when he was called back by Arcturus. "Potter," the older man called upon his arrival. "We aren't finished yet. You and I need to have a discussion," he requested firmly. "Yes, sir," Harry replied, taking a seat in front of the desk where the older man had situated himself. "You can't fight this war yourself," Arcturus stated simply. "You need allies, someone to stand beside you in battle, someone you would trust with your life. Understand?" he asked, not wanting the boy to truly answer. Harry thought for a moment on what the older man had said and nodded in agreement. As much as he would like to end this war by himself, he knew it was not possible. "Is there anyone you trust that much?" Arcturus asked. Again, Harry thought about what he had been asked and found that there was only one person who had not wronged him and had been honest with him from the start. "Only you, sir," Harry replied sincerely. The older man had not expected that answer, but found that he was somewhat touched by the sentiment. Despite this, he still shook his head ruefully. "It can't be me," he answered. He raised his hands to silence the young man when he saw that he was going to interrupt. "Let me explain," he requested. "I, like Dumbledore, have had my war. I am too old to be that person," he stated simply. "Even in my prime I struggled to keep up with Charles, and now I would stand no chance in that position," he explained. "Believe me, when the time comes, I will fight with everything I have, but I cannot be trusted with your life, nor can I expect you to carry me as you no doubt would have to," he concluded. "Then there is no one I can trust that much," Harry replied, shrugging. "Although it pains me to admit it, I think there is one person you could rely on, if he learns to curb his foolishness," Arcturus responded. "Serious?" Harry questioned. The older man nodded his concurrence. "Yes, despite his tendency for stupidity and immaturity, he is a very gifted and capable wizard, and he seems to be taking this war seriously," the older man explained his reasoning. "And beyond that, he cares for you as though you were spawned from his own pathetic loins," he elaborated. Harry agreed. In the short amount of time he had spent with his convict of a godfather, he had shown him nothing but care and regret for his past actions. The man was willing to give the then 13-year-old Harry a real home without hesitation, having only spent a small amount of time with him. Hell, he escaped Azkaban to try and save him from the traitor and had been on the run since. "And he can learn the same magic as me," Harry piped up in realization. "Indeed he can, and that is an advantage that neither of you should pass up," the older man replied. "You should at least consider it." Arcturus finished, bringing the conversation to an end. Harry had spent days considering it and found that despite the lack of presence of his godfather throughout his life, there was no one else he could trust in that way. He had considered both Ron and Hermione, but found the former was fickle at best, and his jealousy would be intolerable, and the latter would more than likely take exception to him, doing what needed to be done. In reality, he wanted to protect Hermione more than anything else. He knew he would have much blood on his hands by the end of this, and did not want her to have to share his fate. He knew she was a capable witch, but he could not be certain on her mindset and how she would deal with what was to come. He loved her as he would a sister, had he had one, and he couldn't face being responsible for corrupting her like that. So he had concluded that Sirius was his best option, and actually found himself excited at having someone he could rely on when he needed it. He had spent moments in the last few weeks envisioning himself and his godfather emulating their grandfathers on the battlefield, sharing a true meaningful relationship the way they should always have had, and watching each other's backs as the older men once did. Harry shook his head and broke himself from his reflections before answering the older man. "Yes, sir. I remember," he answered. The older man nodded. "How are you doing with your schoolwork?" he asked, the boy knowing he had been paying a lot more attention to it recently. "I've mastered all the spell work and the theory for both my Odebiles and Newts, and way beyond that," Harry replied. "Even runes and arithmancy?" Arcturus questioned with raised eyebrows. "Yes, sir, it seems I have a knack for them," Harry replied, shrugging. He had been very surprised at how easy he had found the subjects, and found both of them useful with his spell work. "Impressive," the older man replied. "Well, we will get Christmas out of the way, and I will get Griselda Marchbanks to come and do your audibles with you," he said. "She can be trusted, and I will get an oath of silence from her," he explained. "She is firmly in Dumbledore's corner, and will understand why and won't ask many questions," he finished. Harry just nodded and prepared to leave for his rendezvous with Sirius. "I will come back here before I leave tomorrow," Harry explained to Arcturus. "Okay, good. That gives us one more chance to go over the plan," the older man responded. Harry just rolled his eyes and shook his head. They had spent the last 2 days on the plan, and it was firmly implanted in his mind. "Yes, sir," Harry shouted, standing to attention and adding a mock salute before disapparating. "Cheeky bastard," Arcturus mumbled to himself, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. Harry appeared in the conference room at Gringotts, having gotten permission from Barchoke to do so, and awaited the arrival of his godfather. He didn't have to wait long as soon the door opened to reveal the man. The two looked at each other appraisingly for a few seconds before they each closed the distance between them and grabbed each other in a firm embrace. Eventually they broke apart, and Sirius was the first to speak. "How are you, pup?" he asked, clearly concerned. "I'm okay, Sirius, really I am," he said, raising a hand to prevent his godfather questioning him further on his welfare. "Before I forget, I have something for you," he added, removing a galleon from his pocket. Sirius was confused by the gift. "My life may not be great right now, Harry, but my coin bag is not that sparse," he explained. Harry just shook his head at the man. "It is a portkey that will take you to the wand maker that made mine. Just tap it with your wand and wait for him to activate it from his end to take you to him, and he will make you a couple of wands that will work best for you," he explained. Sirius was clearly taken aback by what he had been given. "Thank you," he said gratefully. "The one I'm using is okay, but it could definitely be better," he concluded. "Any news on what Dumbledore has the order guarding?" Harry asked. "No," Sirius replied, shaking his head. "He's barely been seen since he found out about Hagrid. He took it very badly," he finished sadly. "Any news on the rat?" he asked, hopefully, changing the subject. "I'm going for him tomorrow. From what I have learnt, he is in Toulouse working on something for Voldemort," he explained. "France?" Sirius yelped. "You're not going alone, are you?" he asked, worriedly. "I am," Harry replied. "I can take care of myself. Sirius and you are certainly not in any position to help me, and everyone else either thinks that I'm dead or missing. It has to be done this way. I can get in and out quietly without raising any suspicion," he explained further. "I know, pup, but I don't like it," Sirius responded, dragging a hand through his hair nervously. "It will be fine," Harry said, attempting to reassure the man. Sirius just nodded, although he really was not for this idea at all. "Did you only want to see me to give me this?" he asked, waving the coin in front of him. No, Harry replied sincerely. I've known about you for 2 years and we haven't spent more than an hour with each other, and there's always been other people there. He continued. I'm pretty sure my dad would be pissed about that, he finished with a chuckle. Yeah, I think old Prongs would prank and hex us into oblivion if he could. Sirius added, scratching his chin with a chuckle of his own. I went and saw them for the first time on Halloween. Harry spoke quietly. Oh, pup, I wish I could have been there with you, his godfather said sincerely, placing a hand on his godson's shoulder. It's okay, Harry replied, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. It was horrible, though. Mum and Dad's graves were nothing like they should have been, so I changed them, he said without any regret. Show me, Sirius responded with a raised eyebrow. We can't go there now, it's too risky. I don't know if the place is being watched, he explained. Pensieve, the animagus retorted. Barchoke isn't here, and I doubt he'd like us going through his stuff, Harry replied knowingly. I have one and a bottle of fire whiskey at mine, Sirius said in a suggestive tone. No one else is there, and we won't be disturbed in the drawing room, he assured the teen. Harry just nodded and smirked at the smile his godfather gave him. Sirius handed him a scrap of parchment, which he read. The headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix can be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place. Fidelius charm? Harry asked, impressed. Yes, how the hell would you know that? Sirius asked incredulously, knowing it wasn't learnt about until 7th year. I do read, Sirius. What you think I've had my thumb up my arse the last 6 months? He asked in jest. You do surprise me, pup, the other man intoned. Can you apparate, or do you need the help of your ruggedly handsome godfather for once? He asked, posturing up and posing in a superior manner. Harry just raised an eyebrow before disappearing without a sound. Oh, come on, Sirius said loudly, looking towards the ceiling and gesturing dramatically with his arms. Silent apparition? Really? He questioned whoever was watching him from above. With that, he shook his head and followed his godson, trying his very best to be as silent as possible. He appeared in the familiar street outside of his home and immediately fell on his backside. Oh, he moaned, clambering to his feet and rubbing his posterior. You tried to be silent, didn't you? Harry asked, trying not to laugh. Why can't I do it? Sirius whined petulantly. Because you're a crusty old mutt who spent 12 years in Azkaban, Harry answered casually. You better go in first and see if the coast is clear, he added, tapping himself on the head with his wand and disappearing under a disillusionment charm. Crusty old mutt? Sirius mumbled to himself, shook his head at his godson, and entered the house to ensure it was empty. He entered the kitchen to find Tonks sat drinking a cup of tea. In somewhere nice? She asked when he entered the room. Is anyone else here? Sirius asked urgently. No, it's just me, and I was just about to leave, she answered. Why? She inquired. Sirius ignored her and gestured to the front door to indicate it was safe for Harry to come in. He did so and dropped his charm when he saw it was only the two of them inside. Miss Tonks, he said to the now pink-haired Aurora. It is nice to see you again, he added, giving her a grin which made the metamorph flush. Potter, she acknowledged, simply attempting to compose herself, and averted her gaze towards the table. Harry Mock sighed and looked at the young woman appraisingly. I do wish you would call me Harry. We have been intimate after all. In battle, of course, he added, seeing the woman flush further. Sirius was shaking with the effort to keep himself from bursting with laughter. He had never seen his cousin like this, and he knew she would not appreciate him laughing at her expense. Yes, well, I have to go, she replied, and stood suddenly unable to control her hair, changing to a deep crimson to match her face. She left the room in a hurry, and the sound of the front door opening and closing was heard very soon after, at which point Sirius lost complete control and roared with laughter, banging his fist on the table. When did you become so smooth with the ladies? He asked, wiping tears from his eyes after he had managed to compose himself. I don't know, Harry replied sincerely. I guess when you are Voldemort's #1 target, women really aren't so scary, he added with a shrug. Come on, Casanova, Sirius said, shaking his head and leading them out of the room. The Pensieve is up here, he nodded towards the stairs. They entered a nicely furnished drawing room, and each stood at the circular oak table in the centre, where the Pensieve sat. I never got the chance to visit them either, Sirius began sadly. Let's see how much they messed it up, he requested, gesturing to the pensieve. Harry complied and removed the memory of him and Arcturus visiting the graveyard in Godric's Hollow and placed it in the stone bowl. Sirius entered the pensieve and Harry waited for him to return, not wanting to revisit the memory just yet. It was around 10 minutes later that his godfather emerged with puffy eyes and tears streaming down his face. He immediately grabbed Harry and simply cried into his should for a few moments before he pulled himself together enough to speak. "They would have loved what you did," he said confidently. "Thank you for doing that for them," he added sincerely. "It just felt right," Harry replied solemnly. Sirius nodded and summoned a bottle of fire whiskey and 2 glasses from a cabinet on the other side of the room. He poured them both a drink and passed one to Harry before taking a seat. Harry followed his lead, and the two sat in silence for some time, sipping from their glasses. "You know," Sirius said, breaking the silence, "your father was the first friend I ever had," he continued, and took another sip from his glass. "Being a black is hard enough with the family reputation, and growing up myself and my brother were kept away from other families because of our mother," he explained bitterly, draining his glass and refilling it. Harry sat in silence and just took in every word his godfather was saying. "I wanted to be different so badly and begged the Sorting Hat to put me anywhere but in Slytherin," he explained. "When I was sorted into Gryffindor, everyone was shocked," he added, shaking his head with a bark of laughter. "I sat at the table and everyone moved away from me thinking I had tricked the hat. But James came over and introduced himself. He didn't care about my family reputation, probably because of Aunt Doria being his mother. He sat down and ate with me and didn't care what anyone else thought. That was the type of man your father was, Harry," he said, looking his godson in the eye. Harry nodded gratefully at the other man for the information he was sharing. "Don't get me wrong, he was an arse mostly," he began again laughing, "but he was my best friend and we were both arses together. We didn't take much seriously, but we always made sure our work was done and we were the best in our year. Along with your mother, of course, but we spent our school years playing jokes and pranks and saw everything as a laugh. It wasn't until our 5th year, when you-know-who became a real problem, that we started to change, and even then it wasn't until we graduated that we saw how bad things were getting for ourselves." He finished draining his glass again and pouring another helping for himself and Harry. "What happened?" Harry asked eagerly. "We joined the Aurora Academy," Sirius answered simply. "Me, your father, Frank Longbottom, Alice, who would become his wife, and the Prewick twins. They were Molly's younger brothers. They wouldn't let Remus join, and Peter was nowhere good enough. Your mother stayed on at Hogwarts and completed a charms mastery with Flitwick," he added. "If my dad was such an arse, how did he end up with my mum?" Harry asked, trying to get his godfather to backtrack a little. "Oh, well, your mother really did not like your father much until our 7th year. He was far too immature for her," he began. "Your mother was a lot like Hermione at first, a real know-it-all, and wasn't very popular because of it, but that changed as she got older, and she curbed her attitude quite a bit, and she became really good friends with Alice and a few others," he explained further. "Your father hounded her for a date from 3rd year, and she agreed to go out with him in 7th. I think to just get him off her case," he said, chuckling. "Whatever he did on that date must have impressed the hell out of her, because after that they were inseparable and she fell for him hard. Everyone could see it," he finished knowingly. "And they left school and got married," Harry stated. "That's pretty much it," Sirius replied, scratching his chin. "I know it's not much, but that's how it was. You have to remember, Harry, they were only 21 when they were killed. They barely made it into adulthood," he concluded sadly. "I know," Harry replied just as sadly. "What was it like when they found out Mum was pregnant?" Harry asked, wanting to change the subject to something less upsetting. Sirius grinned at the question. "It was very amusing," he replied. "I was at home and Prong suddenly appeared in my front room, looking very pale and struggling to breathe. He was a real mess, stuttering and jabbering like an idiot," he added, shaking his head. "I thought there had been an attack until he came out with the classic line," he said with his eyes full of mirth. "What did he say?" Harry asked impatiently. "Now don't hold this against me, pup. Remember, I was young and thought it was funny," he half pleaded, half chuckled. "Well?" Harry demanded irritably. Sirius sighed. "He told me that the contraceptive charm I had given him didn't work," he yielded. What he actually said was, "I should have known a contraceptive charm wouldn't turn my semen orange," he finished laughing. "How the hell did that come about?" Harry asked, astounded at his father's foolishness. "Well, I was drunk and your father appeared pretty much the same as he did that night and asked me for a powerful contraceptive charm. You see, powerful wizards sometimes need something a little stronger. I gave him a color-changing charm. Me and Remus had worked out that would change your bodily fluids a different color. It's quite clever, really," he explained with a pleased expression. "Anyway, the result of that little mishap was your mother's pregnancy," he concluded. "So I was a mistake?" Harry asked incredulously. "Not at all, Perp," Sirius replied. "Your mother was delighted. It was James that wanted to wait at first, but when he got over the shock, he wanted nothing more than to have you. Even though he was terrified and your mother was a hormonal mess, it was the thing he wanted the most. Your grandparents were just as delighted," he added, trying to placate his irate godson. "Yeah, I have the pictures," Harry replied, shaking his head and draining his glass. Both were beginning to feel the effects of the whiskey, but were enjoying the long-overdue time they were having together. It was Harry that broke the silence next. "What about you? Didn't you meet someone worth holding on to?" he asked sarcastically, completely aware of his godfather's reputation. He was surprised to see a pained expression appear on the man's face. "I did," he replied, swallowing deeply, the pained look remaining. "I'm sorry, Sirius," Harry cut in sincerely. "I didn't realize," he finished lamely. "You didn't know?" Sirius replied, shaking his head. "It's okay, pup," he said, trying to assure the young man. "Wait here a moment," he added, and left the room. He returned a few minutes later and handed Harry a photograph. The photo was of a younger Sirius and a very beautiful dark-haired woman who was wrapped in his arms. Harry could clearly see how happy they both were and could only compare it to pictures he had seen of his parents and grandparents. The young woman had hazel eyes and her features were very delicate. She looked almost frail but was stood as tall as his godfather, and her eyes brimmed with an air of confidence. Her name was Marlene McKinnon, and we were engaged to be married. Sirius began emotionally. "I loved her just as much as your father loved your mother, and she was the only woman who ever tamed me and could keep me in line," he added, with a forced laugh. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about her, Harry," he said sincerely. "I couldn't ever love someone the same way I loved her, still love her," he corrected. "It was just everything about her. The fact that she was beautiful meant nothing to me, compared to just who she was. She was beautiful inside and out. She just had this way about her that I couldn't resist, and I know she felt the same about me. She accepted me for who I was, and I changed, not because she made me, but because of her. She made me a better man, the best man I could be," he finished with a tear escaping from his eye. "What happened to her?" Harry asked, handing the picture back to Sirius, who clung to it as if it were a lifeline. "I'm not completely sure," he replied. "Her family home was razed to the ground by Death Eaters, and they were all killed," he explained. "I'm really sorry, Sirius. I didn't mean to drag that up." Harry apologized again sincerely. "It's okay, pup. Honestly, it has taken me a long time to learn to live with it, but I have it as just one of the pieces of guilt I have to carry with me, just like your parents," he added sadly. "That wasn't your fault, though," Harry pointed out. "I didn't personally sell them out, but I may as well have," Sirius replied, clearly angry at himself. "It was me that convinced them to use the rat, and even after he handed them over, I went after him instead of being there for you," he added ruefully. "I should have taken you and raised you as your parents wanted. Instead, I was reckless and went after Wormtail and ended up in Azkaban," he said angrily. "You didn't know that would happen," Harry interjected. "No, but you should have been my first priority," he replied, taking a long pull straight from the bottle. "Because of me you were raised by those bastards who did God knows what to you, and that is my fault, Harry. That blame lies only with me," he finished, taking another long drink. "If that is how you really feel, then redeem yourself," Harry stated simply. "And how can I do that, pup? Look at me," he said, gesturing to himself. "I am an on-the-run prisoner that can't even leave my own house because everyone thinks I am a murderer and would flay me alive in the streets given half the chance," he finished heatedly. "We can change that when I get the rat," Harry responded. "And I survived the Dursleys, Sirius. Yes, it was unpleasant, and I hate the bastards for what they put me through, but I'm still here," he declared. He took a moment to compose himself and breathe deeply before he continued. The truth is, I need you now more than I ever did before, he began sincerely. Your grandfather was right. I can't fight this war alone, and I need people by my side that I can trust with my life and who trust me the same way, he continued. After speaking to you tonight, I know more than ever that you are that person, Sirius, and I would gladly have you watching my back when I need it most, and I would gladly cover yours, he finished passionately. Sirius was dumbfounded at his godson's declaration and couldn't find the words to reply. Harry saw that his godfather was unable to answer, so instead he removed a leather book from his pocket that he resized to the original large leather tome. This is a book with both the Potter and Black family magic in, he explained to his godfather. I heard Aunt Cassie speak about them once. She said that Charles and my grandfather both had one, but I didn't believe it. Me and James overheard them a few times reminiscing about their days at war, but we didn't hear anything about this, he said, in obvious surprise. I have the other copy, Harry explained. If you really feel guilty for all of those things, then learn this, he said, gesturing to the book. Let's make every last one of those fuckers pay for what they took from us, and make sure they don't do it to anyone else, Harry said fiercely. I know you hate your family and don't like the magic, but do it for them. Sirius, Harry pleaded. Do it for my parents and your fiancé. Don't let their deaths be for nothing, he finished. Harry let his words sink in before he continued. He knew he was close to convincing his godfather and knew he only needed to push a little more. I think this war needs a Potter-Black alliance just like Grindelwald faced, don't you? He questioned Sirius. The emotion Sirius was feeling was very obvious. The man was overwhelmed at the chance at redemption he had been given, and he vowed to himself that he wouldn't squander it. He had failed James and Lily, and in a way he had failed Marlene too. But he would not fail Harry. He would die before that happened again. He took the book from his godson and nodded resolutely. There is no one else I would rather stand with and fall with, if necessary, pup, he slurred sincerely. With that proclamation he succumbed to the large amount of alcohol he had consumed and passed out, hitting his head heavily on the table. Sleep well, Padfoot. I will be back before you know it, Harry said quietly, and placed a kiss on the head of his godfather before he left the house and apparated back home. He appeared in the drawing room where Arcturus was sat reading a very old-looking book. When the older man realized Harry had returned, he raised an eyebrow at the drunken teen. "Good night?" he asked. Harry just nodded and took a seat opposite the man. "I can trust him, like you said," he informed Arcturus. The older man was relieved to hear it and felt a little easier at the prospect of the coming war. He knew the boy had someone he could rely on and trusted both his and Harry's judgment of his grandson. "What do you know of the McKinnons?" Harry asked. Arcturus pondered the question. There had been a prominent family before they were eliminated in the last war. They were one of the few families he genuinely respected, and their loss was felt throughout the entire wizarding community. They were an old family like his own, and were a part of the neutral faction when it came to the political arena. It was surprising when they were targeted by Riddle. It made no sense to anyone. They didn't have much influence, and they were not as affluent as some of the other families. Fenton McKinnon, the head of the family, was a very outspoken man and quite the proficient fighter, but he refused to choose sides. Perhaps it was this that made him a target. Whatever the reasoning, it was something Arcturus could never be sure of. "They were an old family and well respected," he began. "They were killed in the last war for some reason. Why do you ask?" he questioned the young man. "Sirius was engaged to one of the daughters. I was just curious," Harry responded. "Was he?" Arcturus asked with raised eyebrows. "That would have been a match I approved of," he added thoughtfully. Harry remained silent and waited for the older man to continue. When he did speak, it was not about Sirius or the McKinnons, however. "You are ready for tomorrow?" he asked the teen. "Yes," Harry replied. "I have my portkeys and cloak ready, and everything else I will need," he added, seeing that a simple yes was not sufficient. "Good," the older man answered. "Remember, do not take stupid risks," he said, pointing at the teen. "If it gets fucked up, then you use that portkey. Understand?" he asked the teen sternly. "I understand, sir," Harry replied, genuinely knowing the older man was demonstrating a lot of trust in him. Arcturus nodded, pointed his wand at Harry, and muttered a sobering charm. "You will need a clear head. Drinking the night before is not wise," he lectured firmly. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is your first real test in this war. Show them what it is they are up against, Potter," he finished, dismissing the young man. Harry stood. All signs of the drunken weariness he felt were now absent. He nodded at the older man. "I will, sir," he said confidently. With that, he left the room and made his way to his bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day for Harry Potter. Break. Sirius Black awoke with a pounding headache and feeling confused as to why he was asleep at the drawing-room table. It was then that he saw the book left behind by Godson, and the memories of the previous night came flooding back. He remembered the promise he had given Harry and the vow that he had made to himself he would not let him down. He removed his wand and summoned a hangover cure from the alcohol cabinet and the vial in one long gulp. Harry was going after the rat today, and Sirius knew he had work to do. Today was going to be nerve-wracking for the marauder, and he planned on passing it prodigally. He made to leave the room to begin his day when he was cut short by a tapping on the window. Outside was a very bedraggled-looking owl that he allowed entry and removed the roll of parchment attached to its leg. The owl then flew and perched on the back of one of the chairs, clearly keen to rest itself. Sirius unrolled the parchment and began to read. "Bodford. I am sorry it has taken me so long to reply. Things on the continent are much worse than I thought they would be. It seems the friends of our dark friend are much busier here than they are at home. I had a run-in with Greyback and a few others, but I managed to give them the slip, and I am currently making my way home. Please pass on my condolences in regards to our large friend, and I will see you soon. Mooney." The relief Sirius felt having heard from his childhood friend was overwhelming. He allowed himself to release a deep breath, knowing that the werewolf was okay. He left the room to begin his day, his thoughts with both his godson and the task he was attempting, and the werewolf he regarded as his own brother. Break. Harry found himself at the port of Dover waiting to board the ferry that would take him to Calais. He and Arcturus had decided that it would be best to travel using Muggle transportation as to not raise any suspicions by using a portkey or unwarranted apparition. The December air on the coast of England was cold, yet refreshing, and the steady, warm breath of the young man could clearly be seen leaving his body as he exhaled. Harry was grateful for the fact that he had learned warming charms and was using them liberally to maintain his body temperature. He had forgone wearing a heavy coat or any other thick clothing that would weigh him down or encumber his movement, knowing he needed to be as light and loose as possible. Not having a passport, Harry boarded the boat under his cloak and stood at the rear of the deck in a secluded corner. As the ferry left the port, he watched as the coast drifted further away from him, particularly focusing on the white cliffs that reminded him of a song he had heard his Aunt Petunia listened to, sung by a woman. He was a young boy at the time, but he still remembered the beauty of the song and the voice of the lady that was singing it. His entire world was on that small island he was now leaving, and it really hit him how small his home was. The world is a huge place, and he had spent his entire on only a tiny fraction of it. It may be small, but to Harry it was and would always be where his heart was. He knew if he truly wanted to, he could flee the coming war and see the rest of the world, spend the rest of his life drifting from place to place. But he knew he would not be happy, and the thought of the guilt of leaving his home in the hands of Riddle sickened him and made him feel ashamed. He scowled at the thought and found himself distracted by the appearance of a man carrying a little girl who could not be any more than 5 years old. "What are they, Daddy?" the little girl asked, pointing to the cliffs in the distance. "They are the white cliffs of Dover Ella," he replied. "When you see them coming closer, that's when you know you are going home," he added knowingly. The little girl stared at the cliffs in awe. "They are really pretty, Daddy," she said in an innocent voice. "They are," her father agreed. "Just like you," he said playfully, swatting her on the nose with his finger, eliciting a giggle from the small child. "Now I think we should go back in, don't you?" he asked. "We don't want you catching a cold, do we?" he continued, raising an eyebrow at his daughter, who giggled again. "Yes, Daddy, because Mummy would be mad at you again like when turned all our clothes pink," she said sternly. One time you put a red sock in the wash and you pay for that mistake for the rest of your life, he grumbled to himself as he walked away to take his daughter back inside. Harry smiled at the interaction between the two and was hit with a sudden realization, an epiphany, if you will. Yes, he was fighting to avenge himself and the wrongs his family had suffered at the hands of Riddle and his followers, but he was fighting for something else. He was fighting for those that couldn't. He was fighting for the moments of innocence like the one he had just witnessed. He was fighting for the right for everyone to have children and bring them into a world that was safe, a luxury he had not been given. He was fighting for those everyday rights that most took for granted, and he was fighting for a future that he wanted for himself. A future that was not plagued by dark lords, and a future where he could finally have the family he had always craved. A family he would do what was necessary to protect and ensure they were happy. Harry Potter was not only fighting for his family past, but the family he was hoping was to come, and all the other families who had the right to a life without a conflict and constant peril hanging over them. He had feared that he would lose himself in the pursuit of vengeance the way his grandfather had, and would lose his way if that vengeance was not attained. Harry realized that yes, he was very similar to his grandfather, but he was his own man and had his own agenda, an agenda that was worth his life if he was to fail, something he refused to even consider. He was dragged from his musings as the ferry arrived in Calais, and he quickly exited the boat and headed towards the town to get some food. He had heard great things about the French pastries, and was particularly keen to try them while he was here. He made his way into town and quickly found a small patisserie which he entered, having smelled the inviting aroma coming from within. At the tinkle of the bell, a young woman appeared from the back where she had clearly been baking, as she was wiping flour from her hands with a small white towel. "Bonjour, madame," Harry greeted her. "Deux croissants, s'il vous plaît," he continued. The woman looked him over critically before shaking her head and placing 2 of the pastries into a paper bag. "Your French, it is terrible," she declared, handing the bag to Harry. "Then it is just as well that I have other talents that more than make up for it." Harry replied, not missing a beat, and shot the woman a winning smile. "Mercy," he added, handing over some francs to the woman, who was blushing at the implied innuendo. "Oui, it is just as well," she managed to stammer. Harry left the shop, shaking his head in amusement. He checked the time and saw that he had around half an hour before he needed to catch his train, so decided he would take a leisurely walk to the station. His journey through the town was uneventful, but he enjoyed it nonetheless. He took in what seemed to be the usual hustle and bustle of the daily life here, and found that it was tranquil in its own way. He enjoyed the architecture of the buildings, never having seen workmanship such as this in person. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the station, still clutching the empty bag that his pastries had come in. He deposited it into a bin as he passed, and made his way to the train he knew he had to catch. He removed his cloak that he had placed in his satchel and draped it over himself to hide him from view. It was now time for him to be focused on the task at hand. He entered the train and found an empty compartment that he locked with a simple locking charm and placed a simple muggle repelling on the door to ensure his privacy. After some time, the train pulled away from the station, and Harry settled down for the journey ahead, enjoying the passing scenery. He had been traveling for around 7 hours, and it was no longer possible to see the passing landscapes properly, as darkness had begun to fall. He resigned himself to reading the book he had brought on potions with him to pass the remainder of the time. He had barely begun reading the page on Felix Felicis when he was distracted by bright jets of light of various colors that suddenly began in the distance outside the train. It was unmistakably spellfire, and Harry could not help but marvel at the recklessness displayed by the French wizards using magic, where muggles would pass through even though there were no buildings in sight. He shook his head at them and paused when he recognized the types of spells that were being fired. These spells were not friendly, and were certainly dark in nature. He noticed the group dressed in dark cloaks were pursuing another consisting of several women who were fleeing. He saw the women had quickly been cornered by them, and he growled in frustration. He knew he had to intervene, probably due to his saving people thing that Hermione was always referring to. With a sigh of annoyance, he apparated out of the train to a line of trees that were behind and close to the group of people. He appeared at the trees completely silently, as planned, and was immediately glad he had decided to investigate. The pursuers were all dressed in full Death Eater garb and had surrounded the women who were begging in French to be let go. The Death Eaters just laughed, and Harry felt a rage boil inside him. But it was what happened next that really pushed him to his limits. He flicked his wand into his hand and took aim at the man, and with another flick he sent 3 black arrows towards the Death Eaters. Crucio the Death Eater roared, hitting one of the women with curse, much to the amusement of his 7 companions, who laughed at his antics. The woman screamed in agony and could do nothing but twitch under the onslaught of the spell. Every fibre of her body felt as though it was on fire, and she immediately wished the man would just kill her and end the torture. "That's it? Scream, you whore!" the man shouted at the quivering heap of flesh beneath his curse. "My master," he was cut short, was suddenly gurgling and wearing an expression of pure shock, as a black arrow had entered his neck from the back and was protruding from the front through his throat, causing blood to leak profusely from the wound. His companion to the right of him had fallen also, instantly silent, as an arrow had found itself embedded in his skull, and one sticking out of his chest that had gone straight through his heart via his back. Both groups turned towards the direction that the arrows had come from in shock, the women feeling hope and the Death Eaters furious that someone would have the gall to interrupt their activities. What they saw had them all shuddering as a shiver ran down their spines. A tall, young and muscular man was stalking towards them with purpose. He was dressed in a dark grey hooded sweater with jeans and white trainers. It was not the obvious athleticism of the young man that had the Death Eaters shuddering, but the brightly glowing green eyes that could be seen clearly even in fast-approaching darkness. They could see he was a wizard by the unusual white and black wand that he held loosely in his right hand. The women shuddered at the power that the young man was radiating. They could feel the magic and the fury rolling off of him in waves, and found themselves worried for him. It was 6 against 1, not the most favorable odds. One of the braver Death Eaters stepped forward to intercept the newcomer. "You should not have gotten involved." "Sonny," he shouted at the man who just kept walking towards them without hesitation. "Avada Kedavra," he roared, aiming the killing curse at him. The women screamed as the curse hurtled towards the young man, who simply turned his head slightly to avoid the jet of green light that missed him by inches. He then flicked his wand towards his would-be killer, and the man was instantly hovering 6 feet in the air, his arms outstretched as though he had been crucified. A further flick of his wand and the Death Eater was screaming in agony as each of his limbs were ripped from the sockets with loud teeth gritting, pops one after the other. The rest of the Death Eaters were shocked at the use of magic the young wizard was demonstrating, and knew he was no slouch with that unusual wand he had. They all began firing curses simultaneously at the man, knowing that it was their best chance to take him out quickly and not get hurt themselves. The ambushed women watched in a mixture of horror and awe as the young wizard moved with a speed and grace that none of them had ever witnessed, dodging the lethal curses and batting some aside as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience to him. It wasn't until another killing curse was fired at him that he retaliated with a spell of his own. He conjured a large, thick slab of granite in front of him that exploded as the curse impacted. In the blink of an eye, he had transfigured the airborne debris into a long javelin-type projectile and banished it towards one of the men, who quickly produced a shield. The rod of granite whistled through the air, passed straight through the barrier, and struck the man through the chest with a sickening crunch, the end impaling into the ground. They watched in morbid fascination as the body slid down the shaft under the weight of itself, the man screaming the full descent. The young man then hissed something incoherent that had them shivering again and feeling uneasy. At his hiss, the ground beneath one of the men transformed into the head of a serpent, which instantly grabbed the man in its maw up to the neck and simply held him there as the man panicked and tried to escape. The wizard then sent a long stream of boiling water at one of the cloaked men, who screamed in agony as his skint was burnt red, raw as it struck him. The young man then had a look of deep concentration on his face, and his eyes appeared to glow even brighter. With a sharp jab, a thick bolt of lightning careened from his wand and hit the man, silencing him permanently and filling the air with the nauseating smell of burnt flesh that had the women retching. He then turned to the last 2 capable of fighting back, who now seemed reluctant to engage him further. He fired a pink jagged spell that caught one of them on the side of his torso, almost cleaving the man in two, and he joined his comrades as nothing more than a bested heap on the floor. He finally fired a bone breaker with incredible speed that ploughed into the man's neck, killing him instantly. He then approached the last man that he had captured in the Earth Serpent and addressed him in a casual yet dangerous tone. "Where is the rat?" he asked, in a low voice. "Please," the captured man begged. "He was with us when we found them," he said, shakily gesturing to the group of women. The young man then turned and scanned the area with his still fury-filled and glowing eyes. He muttered a spell under his breath and growled in frustration when it did not yield the results he expected. "The coward obviously ran," he spat, turning back to his prisoner. He then flicked his wand and hissed again, releasing the man from his bind. "Wand," he commanded, holding out his hand. The other man reluctantly complied and handed it over, and thought better than to protest as the younger man snapped it. "Go," he instructed, gesturing to the large wooded area behind them. The Death Eater did not need telling twice. He left quickly and made his way to the indicated area. "You are letting him go?" one of the women asked incredulously. The young man did not even turn to look at them when he replied. "He won't even make it to the trees," he explained knowingly. With his proclamation, the women turned to watch the fleeing man, only to see him clutch his chest and fall to the ground just shy of the first line of trees. The woman that had been under the crucifix turned to look at the young man who was now walking towards them. She steeled herself and allowed her eyes to meet his. They were still glowing, but much more gently now, and the look of fury had now been replaced by one of concern. "Are you okay, madame?" he asked softly. "I know from experience that that is awful. Can you stand?" he inquired, offering her a hand to help her to her feet, which she took. She managed to get to her feet, but collapsed into the man's arms instantly, and he simply scooped her up and carried her in them as though she was a child. She felt safe there, and the pain seemed to ease now that she was off of the ground. She couldn't move even if she wanted to, and found that she in fact didn't. She lost all control as the horror of the evening settled in, and she sobbed into the young wizard's chest, and he pulled her closer to himself in a gentle embrace in what she knew was an attempt to comfort her. The rest of the women watched how the young man who had just decimated 8 other men without remorse had transformed into the gentle man they were now seeing. He no longer looked the terrifying killer he had only moments ago. He instead looked every bit the savior he was. They were all shaken from their individual thoughts by the man addressing them. "We need to get her somewhere out of the cold," he said gently. "Which one of you live the closest?" he asked the group. "She does," one of the women stuttered, indicating her friend in his arms. "She lives just over Zilwil there," she explained, pointing to a hill close by. "Okay, lead the way," he requested with a nod towards the hill. "Break." Peter Pettigrew was astounded at what he had just witnessed and could only be grateful that he had fallen behind as his team had pursued the women. He was not built for running, being as short and stout as he was. He watched the unknown young wizard dispatch of his men as though they were nothing. They outnumbered him, 8-1, and he hadn't even been scratched. The magic he had seen was on par with that of his masters, and he knew he would have to report what he had seen and what had happened to his Death Eaters. He shuddered at the thought, knowing that a punishment was coming his way. He had failed in his mission to capture the woman, and he cursed the fallen men for playing too much and not taking their assignment seriously. He scurried away in his rat form to inform his master as quickly as possible, knowing the longer he waited, the worse the punishment would be. Break. Harry followed the 7 women who were leading him, while he carried the final member of the group. He reflected back on his performance and was content in the way he handled himself. He knew he could not allow any of the men to escape and report back to Riddle. He was not ready to come out into the open just yet. "Why is it you are carrying her and not using your wand?" one of the women questioned him suspiciously. Harry was not fazed by the question and answered the woman, who clearly had no exposure or knowledge of the Cruciatus curse, except for what she had seen tonight. "Madam, your friend was held under the Cruciatus curse. This way is much more comfortable for her, as I can hold her and she won't be bumped around too much, and even the most mild exposure to foreign magic after the curse would be quite painful for her," he explained. The other woman just nodded at his answer and questioned him further. "How old are you?" she asked. "You look very young, but your eyes look like they have seen much, no?" she inquired. "More than you could ever know," he mumbled quietly, so that even the woman who asked the question couldn't quite hear his reply. He grew weary of the questions and opted to remain silent despite seeing that the woman was waiting for an answer. The woman persisted in trying to gain information. "You are English?" "None," she asked, to which Harry simply nodded, but maintained his silence. Seeing that the young man was not going to answer any more, the woman stopped questioning him, not wanting to annoy the man. It was only 10 minutes later that the group emerged on the other side of the hill, and Harry saw the house for the first time. Clearly the woman came from an affluent family, as it was more of a mansion than a house. The building was carved from white stone and had a high matching wall that enclosed the property within it. Despite its large size, the house looked very homely and inviting. The 7 women and Harry carrying the last made their way into the entrance hall of the house, where one of the women called out frantically, causing a man to appear shortly afterwards, who froze at the scene before looking shocked and angry. He then began shouting at Harry in French, and he only understood a few words here and there. The man was tall, broadly built, and looked fairly rugged. He had short blonde hair that was carefully combed backwards, and he had a goatee to complete his looks. He had icy blue eyes that were currently filled with both confusion and anger as he continued his tirade. Harry was not intimidated by the man, however, so he just stood and waited for the man to finish his rant. The man was cut off by one of the women, who grabbed him in an attempt to calm down. He stopped his tirade and listened to what she was saying. Harry could not understand what was being said, but he knew she was explaining what had happened. The man's expression changed several times throughout the explanation, from anger to fear, back to anger, and then sadness coupled with a rage that made him shake uncontrollably. He gave the woman some instructions, and she left to carry them out. He then turned to Harry and gestured for him to follow him, which he did, followed by the remainder of the women. They entered a lavishly decorated parlor, and the man gestured for Harry to place the woman he was carrying on a comfortable-looking couch. Harry complied, and as he placed the woman on the couch, she moaned. "It's okay now," Harry comforted her by taking her hand. "You're home," he finished, giving the hand he held a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," the woman replied weakly, and attempted to give the teen a smile which came off as more of a grimace. The woman, who had left to carry out the instructions the man had given her, returned carrying a vial of what Harry recognized as a powerful pain relief potion. She poured the potion down her friend's throat, who sighed in relief and immediately began to look better. "You are English, oui?" the man questioned Harry. "Yes, sir," Harry replied, still watching the woman who had fallen asleep now. The man just nodded at Harry and led him to the adjoining room with the rest of the women. They were now in what Harry saw was a living room. The man gestured for Harry to take a seat, which he gratefully accepted. He was feeling a little tired from the fight and carrying the man's wife. "I am sorry for shouting at you. I saw my wife in another man's arms, and I assumed you worst," the man explained with genuine remorse. "It's okay, sir," Harry replied. "I understand," he explained, nodding to the man. The man gave Harry a weak but genuine smile. "It seems that I am in your debt, monsieur," he stated in a business-like tone. "Name what years you want, and if I can do it, then it will be done," he added firmly. Harry just shook his head at the man before he replied. "You owe me nothing, sir," he began. "I didn't help them to gain something. I did it because it was the right thing to do," he answered respectfully and truthfully. The man looked dumbfounded, as did the rest of the women in the room. "There is nothing that I can do for you?" he asked incredulously. "No, sir. I have more money than I could ever spend, and the only thing I do want is something that can't be given," Harry replied a little sadly. "And what is it you want?" the man asked, clearly confused by Harry's answer. Harry looked the man in the eye before he replied. "Peace," he stated simply. He was aware that it was only peace that could give him everything else he wanted in life. The rest of the occupants looked at each other, clearly confused by the young man in the room. It took some time for them to think clearly enough to question the young boy further, who was clearly lost in his own thoughts. "I cannot reward you, can I? Please at least learn your name of your man saved my wife," the man asked. "She is your most precious journey to me," he added, seeing the young man's reluctance to answer. Harry was trying to think fast so that he would not have to reveal his name, not wanting word to get out of his deed. He could see the rest of the room were looking at him expectantly, waiting for an answer. He was about to give an answer when he was distracted by a young blonde teen entering the room. "Papa!" She froze when she saw the gathering of people in the room. Her gaze eventually rested on Harry, and she scowled gently, clearly confused. She walked towards him slowly, not taking her eyes off the young man who was now feeling uncomfortable. She drifted closer and looked him in the eyes, her own changing from a scowl to widening in recognition. "Harry!" She stuttered in shock and threw herself into his arms. "You know this man?" one of the women questioned the girl, raising her eyebrows. "Of course I know him," the girl replied, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, and composing herself. "He pulled me from the bottom of that lake at Hogwarts. He's Harry Potter," she said. The rest of the people in the room looked at each other disbelievingly before one of the women addressed the young girl. "Don't be silly, Gabrielle. Harry Potter is just a little boy," she said confidently. "He sees me," the girl replied heatedly. "I can feel it, but he looked different now, and his magic has changed," she said, frowning again. The group looked at Harry critically before the man asked, "Are you really him?" Harry sighed in resignation and nodded reluctantly, knowing it was useless trying to hide who he was. The people gathered in the room gasped. "Prove it," one of the women demanded with a frown. Harry sighed again and shook his head. "If Gabrielle is your daughter, that would make Fleur your daughter also. We competed against each other in the Triwizard Tournament last year with Victor Crumb and Cedric Diggory," he said to the man. Seeing that they weren't entirely convinced he removed his wand and intoned, "I swear on my life and magic that I am Harry James Potter, the very same one who competed in the Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry last academic year, so mote it be." The golden glow that surrounded him sealed the vow, and to prove that his magic was still intact, he lit the end of his wand with a simple flick. The people in the room were truly shocked. It took several moments to pass before any of them were able to talk, and it was Mr. Delacour who broke the silence. "But you can be no more jeune 15 years old," he stated dumbly, "and yet you bestate fully grown wizards with ease," he added, shaking his head. Harry just shrugged at his observation and remained silent. "Indeed what?" Gabrielle broke in, shocked and a little angry. Her father sighed and explained to his daughter what had happened. Upon hearing the explanation, she shot Harry a look that he could not quite decipher, and she left the room. "Monsieur Potter," Mr. Delacour began, "you have saved both of my daughters, and now my wife there is nothing I could ever do to repay that debt," he mumbled, shaking his head. "There is no debt to repay, sir," Harry said firmly. "Mostly I was in the right place at the right time," he explained. The other man looked at Harry appraisingly before asking him, True that he is back?" he questioned seriously. "Voldemort?" Harry asked, causing those in the room to flinch and gasp. "Oui," Mr. Delacour replied. "Yes, he is back," Harry stated simply. "There were Death Eaters who attacked your wife and the rest of these ladies earlier," he explained to the man. "That explains much," the Frenchman mumbled angrily. "It does?" Harry asked, confused. "Oui, it does," the other man said. "It seems that ye were going to take my wife hostage, as that ye had leverage to make sure we do not intervene," he added. At the confused look Harry was giving him, the man explained further. "You see, Mr. Potter, I am the head of magical law enforcement in France, and he must know that I would not risk my wife for anything. He must have known that if he had my wife here, I would stop the French from helping your country if it gets too much to handle," he concluded. Harry nodded in agreement at his logic. "Why are you Monsieur Potter?" the man asked. "I was looking for someone who was with the Death Eaters, but he no doubt ran when he saw what I did to them," Harry replied bitterly. "Sirius Black?" the man questioned. Seeing the look of confusion the young man had, I know all about him. Your story is famous even here," he pointed out. Harry shook his head. "Sirius is innocent. I was looking for Peter Pettigrew. It was him that handed my parents over." Harry replied, his temper rising, causing the women to shiver at the burst of magic he released unintentionally. "Murdy," Mr. Delacour said. "Your government are good at messing things up, non?" he asked. "You have no idea, sir," Harry responded, shaking his head. Please, Monsieur Potter, call me Jean. You have earned that right, he said to the team. Only if you call me Harry, the younger man replied. Eric at ease, June said, with a chuckle. Before the conversation could go any further, Gabrielle returned with who Harry recognized as Fleur. The two teens were stood either side of their mother, helping her into the room. They placed her carefully on the couch next to June, and Fleur immediately flung herself into Harry's arms. I am so glad that you are okay, Harry, she cried into his chest. And thank you for saving Maman, she sobbed. Harry just wrapped his arms around her and allowed the girl to cry. He wasn't particularly comfortable with the situation, but knew there was little he could in the moment. It's okay, Fleur, he said, rubbing her back comfortingly. She will be okay, I promise. She just needs to rest, he finished knowingly. The young woman eventually extracted herself from the young man and looked at him properly for the first time since she had entered the room. You are no longer a little boy, she said, chuckling. Harry joined in the laughter, remembering the night his name had come out of the goblet and Fleur's preconceived impression of him. No, not so much, he eventually replied. Without warning, she grabbed him and placed a gentle, chaste kiss on his lips, which he instinctively returned. Thank you, Harry, she said, blushing, after she had pulled away. Really, thank you, she added again, stood up. You're welcome, Fleur, Harry replied, giving her a smile. The people gathered in the room were shocked at what the young woman had done, and June, who had been conversing with his wife, was the first to compose himself. You are a very curious young man, Harry, he said, shaking his head. Curious? Harry asked with a frown, knowing that curious was not usually a good thing. Yes, very, June replied. You are in a room with 11 Vila, and yet you are not affected, none, he asked the teen. To the surprise of those in the room, Harry suddenly burst out laughing, and it took him quite some time to pull himself together. I'm sorry, he said to everyone. It's just that I am considered missing at home, and one of the rumours printed in the paper is that I exhausted myself at a Vila conclave, and died or lost track of time. This just reminded me of that. That's all, he explained, chuckling. June shook his head and laughed also, while the women had flushed red and looked a little embarrassed. I'm sorry, Harry said sincerely to the women. I did not mean to offend you. Non, Mr. Potter. We are not offended, one of the women explained. Any Vila conclave would welcome a young man with your power and resistance to us. She elaborated in quite a seductive tone, biting her lower lip at the thoughts she was having. Harry raised an eyebrow at her, but kept silent on the matter and turned to address Jean instead. In answer to your question, yes, I am immune to the allure, he said to the man, who nodded appreciatively. Jean, you are a very strong-willed man, he replied simply. I am okay with just my wife and daughters, but have to wear zists when there are more around, he explained, pulling a chain from beneath his shirt that was silver with a glowing purple pendant on it. It is a charm created by Viola to help fight the allure, he said, holding the chain so Harry could see. Harry nodded at the man, knowing that a charm like that would be very rare outside of a Vila community. I think you need to put up more wards, Harry suddenly said, realizing that Riddle would not give up so easily if he really wanted to kidnap Jean's wife. That was what I was just discussing with Apolline. June replied, It is difficult as our magic is different and most wards interfere with their magic, he said, gesturing to the women. What about a Fidelius charm? Harry inquired. June shook his head. It would work, but G property is too big and I do not know anyone that can perform the charm, he said despondently. I can do it for you if you trust me enough, Harry offered. Thank you, Harry, but you have already done much for my family, June replied, shaking his head. I couldn't ask that of you. If it will keep you all safe, then I honestly don't mind, and it will save me worrying about you all when I leave, he said sincerely. June shared a look with his wife and 2 daughters and nodded in resignation. Are you powerful enough? He asked the young man. Harry shrugged in reply. I guess so, he answered. What is your most powerful spell you can control? He asked further. Harry was a little reluctant to answer, but quickly remembered that most of the people had witnessed him kill 8 men this very evening. Fiendfire, Harry said quietly, causing all the women in the room to shudder, which made Harry look at them in confusion. It is your only fire that can hurt us, Fleur explained. You have complete control, we? June asked. Harry nodded in reply. I would show you, but your house would no longer be here in less than a few minutes." The women shuddered again, and Jean looked at him speculatively. "What about a Patronus?" "It is a good indicator of the power and control of a wizard," he said knowingly. Harry understood what the man was asking, so he flicked his wand into his hand and thought of the usual photo that he did when casting the spell. "Expecto Patronum," he said quietly, causing his testral to erupt from his wand in the usual blinding light. The room was silent as they all looked upon the Patronus that the young man had conjured. It was Gabrielle that approached the near-solid beast and raised a hand to touch it. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I can feel it. It is so warm," she added, awestruck. Harry flicked his wand and the creature disappeared, causing the rest of them to snap out of the respective reveries. "Well, you are strong enough if you are sure you can do it," June stated. "Yes, I can do it," Harry replied. "Who will be your secret keeper?" he asked. "I will do it," Fleur insisted. "Your job is risky, Papa. It should be me," she said to her father, who looked as though he wanted to protest, but nodded at her reasoning. "Okay, stand still," Harry said to the woman. "And the rest of you just be calm. You will feel confused, but you have to be calm," he explained firmly. With that, he began chanting in Latin and waving his wand around Fleur in intricate patterns that the others could not follow. The women could all feel the power coming from the young man and shuddered again at it. After a short amount of time, Fleur was enveloped in a bright blue glow, and Harry could feel the drain on his magic. The occupants of the room stared around dumbly, looking very lost. "You have to write down the location of your house and show it to them," Harry instructed Fleur, who complied by conjuring a quill, some ink and parchment. She wrote down the address of the house and passed it to her father, who then read it and passed it around the room to the rest of the occupants. When it came to Harry, he passed it to June without reading it. "I know where the house is because I performed the charm, but I will forget it when I leave," he reassured the man. "Non-Harry," June replied. "You are always welcome here," he said firmly, handing the parchment back to Harry, who read it and handed it back with a nod. The group sat in silence for a while until Harry broke it. "Okay, I have to leave and go and break the bad news to a few people," he announced. Jean stood and offered the young man his hand, which Harry accepted and shook. "Thank you, Harry, for everything," he said sincerely. "I cannot promise that my government will help your country, but I will come if you send me word, and I will bring as much help as I can when you need it. We." "Thank you, Jean," Harry replied. "I may take you up on that offer. Help is something I am short on at the moment, and by the time the ministry pulls its head out of its arse, it might be too late," he said with a sigh. "You are a good man, Harry Potter, and don't worry. I will have the mess you left out. They're cleaned up," he chuckled, gesturing to the hill they had come down. Apolline stood and took Harry's face in her hands and gave him a kiss on the cheek that warmed it slightly. "Thank you, Monsieur Potter, for everything," she said simply, and sat back down, clearly still feeling the effects of the curse. Gabrielle hugged him and placed a kiss on his other cheek and expressed the same sentiments as her mother. "I will walk you out," Fleur said a little sadly, and started to lead him to the door. Harry turned to the group before leaving and addressed the rest of the women. "It was nice meeting you ladies, and I may just seek out your conclave one day," he said with a grin and a dramatic wink, causing the women to turn red and blush uncontrollably. Jean roared with laughter, and Harry found himself being dragged from the room by the back of his sweater by an annoyed Fleur. "Did you have to say that?" she asked heatedly. "You will get them all excited," she moaned, scowling at him. Harry said nothing but laughed at the reaction he had gotten from everyone. He was glad they were parting on better terms than discussing the approaching war. They soon reached the front door, and Harry made to pass through, but was stopped by Fleur, who had grabbed him in a tight hug. "Please be careful, Harry," she pleaded with him, and Harry could see she was close to crying again. "I will try," he replied gently, holding her by her shoulders and looking her in the eye. She swallowed deeply, nodded at him, and placed another gentle kiss on his lips. "Write to me when you can," she said, making it sound more of a question than a request. "I promise," Harry replied, and he returned her kiss before turning and walking away. He had a surly old git and a reprobate godfather to give some bad news to, something he was not looking forward to doing. Lord Voldemort was not a happy man at all. It had been a month since Peter had returned with the news of his failure, and the fury within the Dark Lord had barely begun to subside. Of course, he had asked the rat to recount his tale several times, and had even viewed the memory of the encounter with the mysterious French wizard, but no positive result of his investigation into the man had yet been yielded. Peter had been punished most harshly by the Dark Lord, and it still brought the man much joy to see the limp the portly man now had in his step. The urge to curse him further still plagued him, but he controlled himself, knowing that the fool still had his uses. He had sent Lucius to carry out the mission that Peter had failed at, and was currently awaiting his return. He knew that holding the wife of the head of the French DMLE could be a crucial advantage to himself in the future, and would ensure that the French would not interfere, even knowing that they would be next on the list once he finally brought Britain beneath his heel, something that he knew would not take much time after he came out in the open. He had his subordinates of any use paving that way already. He had Lucius working behind the scenes on the political field, bribing and blackmailing where necessary to fulfill his needs there, and several others working on various aspects of the magical world that could offer him difficulties if they were to remain unchecked and negated accordingly. He had sent emissaries to the werewolves on the continent in the form of Fenrir Greyback and a few lower followers, knowing that the beasts would be very useful in a fight. All he needed to do was offer them the hope of a better life than they would ever be given under the current regime, and their cooperation was assured. He had already secured the services of the giants, and when the time was right, he would open negotiations with the vampires also, the one group that would be the most difficult to bring to aid in his cause. He knew the Dementors were a sure thing as they had been in the previous war, and all he had to provide them was hunting grounds in which they could consume as many souls as they wished, and no longer had to adhere to the will and whim of the ministry. It also helped him that they were currently the main source of security at Azkaban, where his most loyal followers currently resided. They would be liberated soon enough, marking his first move out into the open. He was pulled from his musings by the arrival of both Lucius and Severus, the former looking very nervous indeed. Lord Voldemort knew he had not brought welcome news. "Come, Lucius," he began. "Explain to me why the wife of Monsieur Delacour is not in your company," he demanded in what appeared to be a casual tone. Lucius knew that the casual tone the Dark Lord used was masking an undercurrent of anger at his failings. As was his custom when he found himself in such a situation, he fell to his knees and prostrated himself to his master. "My lord, I arrived at the location you gave me and the house simply wasn't there," he informed him as composed as he could, but the fear was evident in his voice. The Dark Lord pondered the information he had been given. He knew Lucius was not stupid enough to go to the wrong location. Despite his snivelling and cowardice in the face of his lord's wrath, he was a man of real intelligence and cunning. There was only one possible reason behind the house being missing: the Fidelius charm, but the property in question was very large indeed, and Lord Voldemort knew that to be able to perform the charm was a feat in itself. But to perform it on such a large area was not possible for someone unless they were considerably more accomplished and powerful than the average wizard. The mysterious French wizard, perhaps. That was the only conclusion that was at all fathomable to the Dark Lord, and he growled at the realization. "Rise, Lucius," he instructed the man. "Fear not, I do not hold you responsible for this failure. It is the fault of the idiot Peter. Had he been successful in his attempt, we would not find ourselves in this quandary," he surmised. "Thank you, my lord," Lucius replied, clearly relieved at the mercy he was being shown. "If there is anything I can do to rectify this error, then it shall be done," he finished confidently. An idea suddenly struck the Dark Lord, and he knew the two men in the room were among his most capable followers. "There is something that the both of you can do," he mused aloud. Both men shared a look, knowing that if they were both asked to complete something, then it was of the most paramount importance. "Of course, my lord," they replied as one. "The reason that Peter truly failed has not been shared with any but myself," he explained. Both men exchanged another look. They had both been wondering as to why Peter had failed, but none had been informed as to why. They had just assumed it was the fact that Peter was useless at most things, and he had simply failed at the given task due to his incompetence. "I have a memory I wish you both to view, and I would like your honest opinions on it," he commanded firmly, wandlessly summoning a pensieve with the silvery substance already swirling within the bowl. At the Dark Lord's gesture, both men entered the pensieve, not knowing what to expect from the memory they were about to see. They found themselves in a fairly thin expanse of trees, clearly close to the edge of the wooded area, as they thickened considerably behind them. It was Snape that spotted the rat with its telltale silver paw and pointed it out to Lucius. "I assume we follow the rat," he drawled lazily to his companion, who nodded in agreement. They followed Peter a short distance until they came to the edge of the trees, and they immediately saw what they were intended to. They saw one of the Death Eaters torturing one of the group of Veela they had just captured, clearly taunting her and her friends. It was what they saw next that both confused and shocked them. Out of nowhere, the Death Eater in question and the man to his right were violently felled with arrows. Both men scanned the area looking for the source of the intervention, and quickly spotted a young man with a grey hooded sweater and jeans approaching the group. His face could not be seen as Peter had clearly not gotten a good look at the individual. The only sounds that could be heard were the screaming of their fellow Death Eaters as they were torn apart without prejudice. Both men paled at what they saw and could only compare it to that of which their master was capable of. This young man was clearly very powerful and a very formidable wizard. They watched as he seemed to have freed one of the men who walked towards them, looking extremely relieved, but very gaunt. The man collapsed around 5 feet in front of them, and they were pulled from the memory. Lord Voldemort watched as his subordinates emerged from the pensieve, looking quite green at what they had witnessed. Lucius even had a nervous sweat, which amused the Dark Lord slightly. "What do you think?" he asked the pair, who glanced at each other, willing the other to answer first. "He is clearly capable and quite ruthless." Snape finally surmised as neutrally as possible that he is, the Dark Lord agreed. "Lucius, what say you?" he questioned the other man, who was looking quite sick. "I agree with Severus," he began hesitantly. "But who is he?" he asked, hoping that his question would allow him some time to compose himself. "Something I wish for you to find out. Though he killed my men, he could be a possible ally. It may be that he was hired to protect the Veela, or that he is one of their lovers and was simply protecting what was his." He mused, frowning in thought. "It is unlikely that a man wielding such magic and power would place himself under a light banner, particularly with the way they would view the magic he used," he concluded thoughtfully. "Where would you have us start, my lord?" Snape asked, now wishing he had not been present for this meeting. "A man of such power is very much a rarity, and should not be difficult to locate," the Dark Lord explained. "Lucius, I want you to make discreet inquiries with the French ministry and try to discover who, if anyone, wields that kind of power under their employ," he instructed the blonde. "And Severus," he began, turning to the potions master, "I want you to use the connection Hogwarts has with Beauxbatons to see if any student has graduated from there in the last 10 years that could have been capable of what we have seen. You know what to look for," he finished. "Yes, my lord," both men replied in unison and left to begin their tasks. The Dark Lord turned to his ever-present familiar and stroked her head fondly after they had departed.
"A wizard of such talent could be a very powerful ally indeed."
"Nagini," he hissed. "Or he could be a real thorn in my side if he intends to oppose me," he added after a moment's thought. Break. Things had been relatively quiet for Harry since he returned from France. Both Arcturus and Sirius had taken the news of his failure well after he had explained exactly what had happened, and agreed that he had done the right thing by intervening when he did. Arcturus was content with the way he had dispatched of the Death Eaters, and Sirius had largely been left out of the loop in that regard, with Harry not wanting to have his godfather worry any more than he already did about the teen. The older Black had commended Harry on gaining such an important ally, and deemed the mission to be not a total loss. Christmas had been a quiet affair for both of the occupants of the house. They had exchanged gifts, both equally happy with what the other had given them. Harry had given Arcturus an enlarged photo of his grandparents' wedding day, in which the happy couple and Arcturus, along with his wife, were clearly happy. The older man had even managed a rare smile at the gift he had received from the younger man. Harry was very grateful for the gift Arcturus had given him. He had given him several memories of both of his grandparents, including their wedding day, something that was priceless to the last Potter. From Sirius, Harry had received various photos of his parents' school days, and beyond, including more wedding photos, and one of a very happy Sirius holding baby Harry that he placed with the one of his grandparents on the bedside table. He had given the marauder a couple of wand holsters that were similar to his own and a duplicate of the book of his grandfather's training regime. He had not bought gifts for any others, just in case any owls he sent had been intercepted, but he did get a surprise from his friends in the post, a large package of sweets delivered by none other than Hedwig herself, who was clearly elated to see her owner again and had refused to leave his shoulder for several hours after chiding him for his negligence towards her. The downside to his return was the news that Arthur Weasley had been attacked guarding whatever it was the Order was keeping watch over in the Department of Mysteries. Fortunately for the redhead, one of the portraits in the corridor was a former headmaster at Hogwarts, and had witnessed the attack and was able to inform Dumbledore in the nick of time, saving the life of the man. It was then that Harry knew he would have to meet with the headmaster to instruct him to call off the guard. Whatever was in there could not be important enough to risk lives over. A conversation with the man was inevitable, and although the time had come sooner than Harry would have liked, he knew he had to bring Dumbledore into the fold in some way, knowing it was better they worked together cohesively than have any recurring unpleasant happenings. This was what Harry was now preparing for. He had purposely waited until term had started, as not to put his friends in a precarious position, knowing that the new defense professor was a ministry worker and had been making not-so-discreet inquiries about him. Arcturus would not be attending the meeting. He had stated that it was not prudent for him to come out in the open yet, and had instructed Harry to keep his involvement to himself, and had even had him swear a vow to ensure the information was safe. Harry agreed with the older man and was grateful that he was being trusted to handle the headmaster on his own. He knew Arcturus was less than fond of Dumbledore, and any meeting they would have in the future was likely to be very unpleasant. He in fact knew it would be, as it seemed to be, one of Arcturus's favourite pastimes to often criticize the old coot and insult him in any way he could vocalize. Harry knew a meeting of the Order of the Phoenix was taking place this evening and was waiting for Sirius to send Dobby when it would be a good time for Harry to go. Both he and Arcturus had convinced him that he should meet with the rest of the Order also, so they could at least be assured that he was in fact alive. Sirius wanted him to attend to get to know the people he may come across to some extent, more so that he did not curse them inadvertently when he did by accident. Arcturus wanted him to go so he could gauge possible allies and how useful they may or may not be. He wanted to know if any of them were reliable or were, as he suspected, and described a bunch of blithering piss-ants like the so-called leader of the light. It was then that a small pop was heard, and a house elf appeared in the room, but it was not Dobby as Harry had been expecting, but Elgar. The elf bowed to Harry as he always did before speaking. "The Lord Black wishes to see young master before he leaves," the elf declared before popping away. Harry made his way to the drawing room where he knew Arcturus would be. Upon entering, he could see that the older man was waiting for him, and he indicated the teen to take the seat opposite. "We need to discuss tonight," he said simply. Harry was unsure on what needed to be discussed in particular, but nodded anyway, knowing the older man would have his reasons. "This is the first time you will be meeting these people," Arcturus continued, after he had gotten the nod from Harry. "It is imperative that you conduct yourself accordingly. They must respect you if you do not want them to try and treat you as a child, the way that I expect they will. You must take control of the situation and give no quarter. Do not allow any of them to talk out of turn, nor attempt to control you in any way. You must not show them any weakness. Potter, do you understand?" he asked quietly, but firmly, giving the teen a critical stare. "Yes, sir," Harry replied resolutely. "Good," the older man intoned. "Remember why you are doing this, and remember that you are more able than all of them. Do not hesitate to make sure they know it too, if the need arises," he finished. "Yes, sir," Harry responded once again, knowing the older man was not looking for anything further. It was just as Harry had intended to do by all means. He knew that Molly Weasley in particular would try to mother him, and if Snape was present, he would try to belittle him. He had already surmised that he would have to be firm and not allow any form of liberty to be taken with him tonight. "Is that all, sir?" Harry asked respectfully. Not quite, Arcturus responded. We will be going to the ministry tomorrow to begin your OWL examinations. It seems the time is as good as any now, as the rat is clearly in hiding. I have already contacted the appropriate parties, but have not revealed who either of us are. I will of course be in disguise, and will pose as your tutor. Madame Marchbanks has already consented to an oath of silence, and she will be the only one aware of your identity throughout the process. We will simply change the color of your hair and eyes. That should be sufficient to ensure that you are not recognized, he explained. Yes, sir, Harry replied, suddenly feeling nervous. Arcturus saw this and shook his head. You are far beyond both OWL and New Heat level work, Potter, so it will be a breeze for you, he pointed out knowingly. However, if you do not perform sufficiently, I will be most displeased with you, he added with a hint of a threatening tone. I won't let you down, sir, Harry vowed, not liking the look he was receiving from the older man. It won't be me you let down, Potter, only yourself, Arcturus replied with a shrug. It won't be my future you're pissing away, he added. Use it as an opportunity to really show what you can do, and leave the examiners with no doubts to your abilities. Yes, he asked. Harry had already planned on it. He saw no reason to hold back whatsoever in the exams and truly wanted his achievements to reflect those of his family before him. Harry was about to respond, but before he could, a quiet pop announced the arrival of Dobby, who was wearing a white shirt and tight leather trousers. Harry Potter's Paddy says that Professor Whiskers and his band of merry men has arrived, Harry Potter, sir. The elf informed him before disappearing with a pop. Arcturus shook his head at the elf. Where the hell does that elf get its clothes from? He asked exasperatedly. I daren't ask, Harry answered, shaking his head amusedly. Well, it's not becoming of an elf to dress in such a way, the older man informed Harry, clearly bothered by Dobby's demeanour. What can I say? He's eccentric, Harry said with a shrug. I hate eccentrics, Arcturus mumbled grumpily. He's not inclined towards other male elves, is he? He asked. I have no idea, Harry responded, not wanting to dwell on the sexuality of his friend. Well, there's something not right with that one. What kind of self-respecting male wears leather trousers? He questioned. Sirius does, Harry replied. Apparently it's quite fashionable. Say no more, Arcturus grumbled, rubbing his temples in frustration. But if you parade around here dressed in them, I will curse you out of them. Understand? He asked sternly, pointing at the young man. And you are one to ask about the elf's sexuality, Harry replied, cheekily shaking his head in mock disgust. Before Arcturus could reply, Harry had disapparated. Fucking Potters, he growled. All the same they are, I'll show him, he added, pounding his fist on the table. Break. Albus Dumbledore was sat at the kitchen at number 12 Grimmauld Place, surrounded by all members of the Order of the Phoenix minus Remus, who was on the continent still. Severus was the final member to arrive, looking his usual impassive self. But the headmaster could see a hint of concern in the man's eyes. Knowing that all were present, he began the meeting. Is there any new business? He asked the gathered members expectantly. The minister is still blocking anyone from talking to the press. Kingsley began. Lucius Malfoy has not been seen in the ministry as much, but his owl is always delivering notes to Fudge's office, so he is clearly still in his pocket. He finished his explanation. Yes, you are referring, of course, to the unpleasantness that has started to plague the community. Dumbledore sighed with a frown, more to himself than the group. Clearly Mr. Malfoy has business elsewhere, he added, stroking his beard. I believe I can shed some light on that, Headmaster Snape intoned in his usual drone. Please do, Severus, my boy, Dumbledore responded with a gentle twinkle. The Dark Lord has expressed a wish to have the wife of the French head of the DMLE kidnapped and held under his care to prevent any possible interference on their part, he explained. This caused a murmuring to begin at the table, knowing that if this was to come to pass, then it would not be good for them, and could even make a fresh enemy in the French government. At hearing this, Sirius was paying full attention to the man he would usually ignore entirely, not trusting him an ounce. He sent Pettigrew and a group of 8 to accomplish this task initially, he continued. But of course, being incompetent, he failed, Snape informed them, much to the relief of those in the room. That is a relief. Dumbledore agreed with the sentiment of the room. Yes, but it is not his failure that is the problem. It is the reason he failed. Snape continued further. The occupants at the table looked confused. They could all see the usually unflappable potions master was a little concerned now, and it did not sit well with them. What caused him to fail Severus? Minerva asked. An unknown wizard intervened during the kidnap attempt, Snape drawled, enjoying the tension he had created. And? Minerva questioned impatiently. He laid waste to every last Death Eater minus Pettigrew, who escaped. He spoke gravely, without any trace of amusement. He killed them all? Kingsley asked, in disbelief. Yes, Snape answered, irritably. In a very violent manner, and without hesitation, the Dark Lord has tasked Lucius and I to locate this man and see if he is a possible ally. The reason Lucius has been absent is because he was sent to retrieve the woman, but it seems that someone has managed to place the property under the Fidelius charm, he finished. What do you mean, violent manner? Dumbledore asked with a frown. Dark and very destructive magic, Snape answered seriously. Dumbledore sat and pondered the answer he had been given by his spy. If Severus saw the magic as dark and destructive, then it must have been just that. Those Death Eaters must have been green to be taken out by one man, Kingsley cut in, clearly having been thinking about it. They weren't the best the Dark Lord has to offer, but they were not slouches either. I saw the memory of what this man did to them, and they fought back very well, but they were no match for him. From what I saw, he would not struggle to destroy any of you at this table, and the Dark Lord was clearly impressed with him, something that is not easy to achieve, he explained with annoyance to the Auror. Do you think he may be a rival Dark Lord? Molly Weasley asked worriedly. Possibly, Snape drawled clearly, thinking on what the red-headed woman had asked. Sirius was half amused by the discussion at the table, and half angry at his godson for withholding so much from him. He would be having words with Harry Potter when he got here.